He swore she was just the past. But 2 years later, she walked into his wedding, holding the children he never knew were his. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The words themselves cut deep enough to make the world around Evelyn blur, as if someone had tugged the ground out from under her feet. "You're the past," Noah said, his tone smooth, controlled, practiced. "She's my present." He stood before her in the expansive glass lobby of Blackwell Enterprises, light reflecting off his perfectly tailored suit, his dark hair slicked back with precision, his blue eyes cold enough to send a chill straight through her. He looked like the man the world praised, ruthless, brilliant, unshakable. But she knew better. Or she had once believed she did. Now she wasn't sure of anything. Rachel, the blonde woman standing beside him, tightened her grip on his arm. She didn't smirk, she didn't need to. Her presence alone was a silent victory flag. Everything about her was polished, her flawless curls, her glittering earrings, the subtle scent of expensive perfume drifting through the air. She was the woman his family approved of, the woman who fit into his world, the woman who would never challenge him the way Evelyn had simply by existing. For a moment Evelyn wondered if this was a nightmare, some twisted dream she would wake from in her small apartment with relief flooding through her. But the crisp sting in her chest, the tightness in her throat, the distant hum of the building's ventilation system grounding her in reality, it all screamed that this was real. Painfully, humiliatingly real. She forced herself to lift her chin. She refused to fall apart in front of him. Not in the building where she had once waited for him to finish meetings. Not in the lobby where he used to pull her into his arms when no one was looking. Not in the place where he once whispered that she made him feel like a person, not just a title. That version of him was gone. If he ever truly existed. "We're done, Evelyn," he continued, his voice clipped and cold, as if reading from a script. "It's best you accept that and move on." Move on. As if she hadn't tried. As if loving him had been a conscious choice instead of something that took root the moment she met him. Her fingers curled around her bag strap, knuckles turning white. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, to shake him until the mask cracked and the man she once knew resurfaced. But her pride held her still. She refused to beg for the affection he tossed aside so easily. "Goodbye, Noah," she managed, though her voice felt like it was being torn from somewhere deep inside. She stepped past him, ignoring the sudden tightness in her chest when she brushed close enough to smell his familiar cologne. She didn't look back. She couldn't. She didn't trust herself not to break if she saw even a flicker of hesitation in his expression. The elevator doors closed behind her, and the moment she was alone, her breath shattered. She clutched the metal railing, blinking through the rising blur in her vision. It was over. Truly over. And he had made sure it ended in the most brutal way possible. By the time she reached the street outside, the city felt unbearably loud. Cars honked. People laughed. Life moved on effortlessly, uncaring of the devastation she carried in her chest. She wrapped her arms around herself, as though she could hold the pieces of her heart together. She didn't know how long she walked, only that she needed to put as much distance between herself and Noah Blackwell as humanly possible. The farther she went, the harder it became to breathe. When she finally reached her apartment, she locked the door behind her and pressed her back against it. Tears spilled down her cheeks, hot, relentless, unstoppable. How could he forget everything they had been? How could he erase her so easily? How could he look at her as if she were nothing? She sank to the floor, curling forward as sobs tore through her. Minutes blurred into hours until exhaustion pulled her into sleep, her cheeks wet, her fists clenched tightly against her chest. She didn't know that while she cried alone in her apartment, a quiet, nearly invisible miracle was already unfolding inside her. She didn't know that life, 2 tiny lives, had already begun, pulsing softly beneath her hand. She didn't know that Noah's words, "You're the past," would soon become the greatest lie he ever told. Because in just a few weeks, she would discover that she was carrying the future he never expected and would never be able to forget. Evelyn woke the next morning feeling hollow and bruised on the inside, as if grief had settled into her bones overnight. Her eyes were swollen, her body heavy, and for a moment she simply lay still, staring at the ceiling while memories of the previous day crashed over her like cold waves. Noah's voice echoed in her mind, sharp and cruel, and she pressed her palms against her ears as if she could push the sound away. But there was no escaping it. No running from words that had cut so deep they left scars. She dragged herself out of bed eventually, moving slowly, as though every step took conscious effort. She kept telling herself she needed to be productive, clean, work, call her sister back, but when she reached the bathroom and flipped on the light, her own reflection startled her. Her face was pale, drained, and for a split second she almost asked out loud, "Who am I without him?" The question frightened her, because she had worked so hard to build a life that didn't revolve around a man. Yet with Noah, it had always been different. He had become a part of her without asking permission, a presence both comforting and consuming. Losing him felt like losing something she'd never get back. She splashed her face with cold water, trying to shake away the spiraling thoughts, but her stomach twisted suddenly, sharply. She grabbed the sink, breathing slowly, trying not to panic. It wasn't the first morning she'd felt nauseous, but she had blamed it on stress, on heartbreak, on the emotional chaos that had swallowed her life in recent weeks. Today, though, the sensation didn't pass. Instead, it rose like a wave and forced her to drop to her knees beside the toilet. When it was over, she sat on the cold tile floor, her hair falling around her face, her breath unsteady. Something was wrong, she could feel it. Or maybe something was very, very right in the most terrifying way. Her hands shook as she got to her feet and opened the bathroom cabinet. She didn't want to think about what she was doing, didn't want to acknowledge the tiny spark of hope and fear igniting in her chest. She reached for the small pink box tucked behind the toiletries, something she had bought months ago, just in case, but never used. Her fingers trembled as she tore the package open. It felt like her entire life hung in the balance as she waited, seconds that stretched impossibly long, her pulse ringing in her ears, her throat tightening with every passing moment. When she finally dared to look down, her breath vanished. 2 lines. Bold. Unmistakable. Her knees nearly buckled again as she sank to the edge of the bathtub. Her hands covered her mouth, and tears welled so quickly she couldn't hold them back. She wasn't just pregnant. She was pregnant with twins. The ultrasound a week later confirmed what her trembling intuition already suspected. 2 small flickering heartbeats. 2 tiny lives sharing one world. 2 pieces of Noah that she would always carry, whether she wanted to or not. She stared at the screen in stunned silence while the doctor explained things she barely heard. She felt the world tilt, this time not from heartbreak, but from something deeper, more overwhelming, almost sacred. She drove home slowly, one hand low on her stomach, as though she could protect the fragile beginnings inside her simply by touching them. Fear tangled with wonder. Panic tangled with fierce love she hadn't expected to feel so quickly. Everything was different now. Every choice she made from this moment on was no longer just hers. She sat on her couch for a long time, staring out the window, the sunlight warm against her face. She thought of Noah, how he would react, what he would say, whether he would care at all. And that was the moment she understood with painful clarity that she couldn't tell him. Not now. Not after he dismissed her so easily, not after he reduced her to a closed chapter in his life. She couldn't give him the power to hurt her again, or worse, hurt the children who hadn't even taken their first breath. She wouldn't let them be born into rejection. With trembling breath, she whispered into the quiet room, "I'll protect you. I promise." She packed her belongings slowly over the next few days, sorting through clothes, books, old memories she couldn't bear to look at anymore. She informed her landlord she'd be leaving at the end of the month. She searched for places far from the city, far from gossip, far from Noah's world of business and cold decisions. When she stumbled upon her late aunt's cottage listing in Savannah, it felt like fate, quiet, peaceful, hidden from everything that had hurt her. She left without telling anyone except her closest friend, who helped her load the last boxes into her car. As she locked the door to her old apartment, she touched her stomach again, marveling at how strange and miraculous it all felt. She wasn't alone. She would never be alone again. As she drove away from the city skyline, tears blurred her vision, not tears of heartbreak, but of transformation. She didn't know what kind of mother she would be. She didn't know how she would raise 2 children on her own. She didn't know if she would ever heal from Noah. But she knew this: she would build a life for her babies, one filled with love, laughter, and safety. And she had no idea that 2 years later, that life she built so carefully would collide with the one she left behind, in the most shocking way imaginable. Noah Blackwell had everything a man like him was supposed to want: power, influence, a spotless reputation, and a fiancée whose presence alone made investors relax and society pages glow. Yet for 2 years he lived with a tightness in his chest that no amount of success could loosen. The world applauded him for his discipline, for his ability to separate emotion from logic, for choosing a partner as polished and pristine as Rachel Carver. But beneath the carefully sculpted surface, Noah carried a hollow ache he never spoke about, a silence he buried beneath endless work and rigid routines. He told himself he didn't miss Evelyn. He repeated it like a mantra until the words became a script he recited automatically whenever someone hinted at his past. He convinced himself that she was a distraction he should never have allowed into his world, a softness he didn't have room for, a risk that threatened the stability of the empire his family built. It was easier to pretend she meant nothing than to admit the truth, that she meant everything, and losing her left him fractured in ways that terrified him. At first, he expected the pain to fade. The human heart, he reasoned, was adaptable, rational, capable of healing through force of will. But weeks turned into months, and months into years, and instead of healing, something inside him calcified. Meetings felt repetitive. Achievements felt numb. Conversations with Rachel felt like chores, her perfect smile never warming him the way Evelyn's quiet laugh once did. He couldn't remember the last time he'd truly slept through the night. Every so often, he found himself replaying moments he'd tried to forget: late-night drives with Evelyn's head resting on his shoulder, mornings when she stole his coffee mug and kissed him before work, the way she used to look at him as if she saw a man worth loving, not the cold corporate shell he was expected to be. He remembered the night he pushed her away, the sharpness in his own voice as he told her she was the past. He remembered the flinch he pretended not to see, the pain in her eyes that nearly made him take the words back. But he didn't. Pride strangled him then. Fear finished the job. His mother praised him afterward, calling him focused again, saying he was finally making decisions like a true Blackwell. She didn't understand the way his stomach twisted at her approval. She had spent his entire life molding him into a version of himself that impressed everyone except the one woman he ever wanted to impress. Rachel, for her part, never questioned the hollowness of their relationship. She was beautiful, poised, and completely oblivious to the fact that Noah had never offered her even a fragment of the emotion he once gave Evelyn so freely. They made sense on paper, and for Noah's mother, paper had always been more important than truth. Still, there were cracks in Noah's composure he couldn't hide. His temper, once controlled like a locked vault, became unpredictable. Minor errors from employees set him off. Nights alone in his penthouse felt suffocating. He often found himself staring at old photographs, not intentionally, but because he couldn't bring himself to delete them. One night, while organizing files, he came across a single picture buried in a forgotten folder: Evelyn in his oversized shirt, her hair messy, her smile so bright it nearly stopped his heart. He had taken it on a Sunday morning, after hours spent tangled together beneath the sheets, when life felt simple and warm and so far removed from the man he pretended to be. His hand shook as he closed the laptop. The memory hit too hard, too raw. He'd made himself believe she would have held him back. But the truth was she was the only person who ever made him feel free. Around the same time, rumors about Evelyn circulated quietly, nothing concrete, just whispers from acquaintances who mentioned in passing that she'd left town, that she'd suddenly disappeared, that she hadn't reached out to anyone. Noah tried to ignore the twinge of concern twisting inside him each time he heard something new, because he had no right to worry, not after the way he'd treated her. Still, every rumor gnawed at him, leaving him restless and irritable. Rachel assumed stress from the upcoming wedding was the reason he seemed distant. She bought new flower samples, redesigned the invitations, changed the color scheme 3 times, and scheduled fittings he barely showed up for. He went through the motions, standing stiffly in front of mirrors while tailors pinned fabric around him. He felt like a guest at his own wedding, a man watching someone else's life unfold without his consent. He tried to picture a future with Rachel, children, holidays, home, but every image felt flat and lifeless, like a photograph left too long in the sun. He tried to imagine Evelyn somewhere far away, happy without him, maybe in love with someone who treated her better. The thought sliced him open in a way he hadn't anticipated, stirring an ache he couldn't name. Sometimes, late at night, he caught himself wondering what he would say to her if he ever saw her again. Would he apologize? Would he ask if she ever missed him? Would he admit that pushing her away was the worst decision of his life? But the imagined scenarios always ended the same way, with her refusing to look at him, turning away as he once did to her. And he knew he would deserve it. Noah buried himself in work to quiet the noise in his mind, taking on project after project until exhaustion dulled the ache. Yet no amount of success could mask the sense that something was deeply wrong, that his life, despite the wealth and power, was built on a foundation of regret. 2 years passed, and the wedding approached like a deadline to a sentence he didn't remember agreeing to. Rachel's parents pushed for final preparations. His mother fussed about guest lists. Reporters speculated about the marriage that would unite 2 powerful families. Everyone seemed thrilled. Everyone except Noah. He woke one morning staring at the ceiling, feeling suffocated by the weight of choices he never truly made. He wondered what Evelyn would say if she saw him now, if she'd laugh at how miserable he looked, if she'd pity him, or if she wouldn't care at all. That last possibility hurt worst of all. But fate, always unpredictable, had already set a different plan in motion, one that would bring Evelyn back into his life in a way he could never have imagined, shattering every illusion and exposing truths that would change everything. And Noah, who thought he had lost her forever, was about to find out that the past he tried so hard to bury was not done with him yet. 2 years had passed since Evelyn walked out of Noah's life, yet the wounds between them had never truly healed. Hers were scars she carried quietly, and his were deep, unspoken fractures beneath a polished exterior. But in those same 2 years, another world had blossomed in Savannah, one built gently and deliberately, far away from corporate towers and suffocating expectations. Evelyn's life no longer revolved around heartbreak, it revolved around 2 bright, curious little girls who filled every corner of her home with laughter and relentless energy. Sophia and Lillian had grown into lively toddlers with dark hair and brilliant blue eyes that caught the light like polished gemstones. Their giggles could soften even the hardest of her days, and their tiny hands reaching for her each morning became the reason she woke with purpose instead of sorrow. Raising them alone was far from easy. There were nights when she stayed awake worrying about bills, times when exhaustion felt like a heavy blanket, and moments when fear whispered that she wasn't enough, but she never regretted a single part of the journey. They were her miracle. They were the family she built with her own shaking hands. Her life in Savannah settled into a rhythm. She worked mornings at a small bakery, where the owner, Mrs. Turner, treated her like family and adored the twins. After work, Evelyn would take her daughters to the garden behind the house, letting them dig in the dirt or chase butterflies while she folded laundry or sipped tea on the porch. The quiet was comforting. The simplicity was grounding. She often wondered how she would have survived those first months if she had stayed in the city, close to the places and memories that held too much pain. Savannah saved her. The girls saved her. Over time, people in the neighborhood came to adore Sophia and Lillian. They were recognized by their matching dresses and oversized curiosity, their love for waving at strangers, and their habit of running to Evelyn with flowers, sometimes wilted, sometimes perfect, but always offered with pride. And while the girls had Noah's eyes and dark lashes, they had Evelyn's warmth, her softness, her resilience. Seeing pieces of him reflected in them no longer caused Evelyn's heart to ache the way it once did. Instead, those similarities felt like reminders of where they came from, not of what she lost. Still, there were rare moments, quiet ones late at night, when Evelyn would rock one of the girls back to sleep and wonder whether she should have told Noah. But every time the thought surfaced, she remembered the look in his eyes the day he told her she was the past. She remembered how effortlessly he replaced her. She remembered the months of silence that followed. And the fear of exposing her daughters to that same coldness kept her resolve firm. His life, his choices, his future, they had nothing to do with her anymore. She didn't follow the news about him, but rumors drifted in through friends or the occasional magazine headline she couldn't avoid. Noah Blackwell was still successful, still impossibly polished, still preparing for the wedding everyone in the business world seemed thrilled about. She never lingered on those articles for more than a second. She refused to measure her life against his. The invitation changed everything. It came on an ordinary Tuesday, tucked neatly inside her mailbox between a grocery flyer and a medical bill. Her name was written in elegant handwriting across a heavy envelope embossed with a silver crest she recognized instantly, Blackwell. Her hands shook before she even opened it, her stomach tightening with dread. She carried it inside, sat at her kitchen table, and stared at it for a dangerously long moment. When she finally broke the seal, the soft scent of expensive paper hit her, followed by the unmistakable text, "You are cordially invited to the wedding of Noah Blackwell and Rachel Carver." Her breath caught. Her heart felt too heavy to beat properly. She expected anger or sadness or some kind of emotional collapse, but instead a strange calm washed over her, as though the pieces of her past were finally settling into place. This was real. This was happening. Noah was marrying the woman he chose over her, and life had continued just as it was meant to. A small folded card slipped from the envelope. She picked it up with trembling fingers. Inside was a handwritten note that made her chest tighten. "My dear Evelyn, you owe him nothing. But I wanted to send this because you deserve to know. He is not happy. Not truly. With love, Helen Blackwell." Noah's grandmother. The only person in his family who ever treated Evelyn with warmth. Evelyn didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or tear the note apart. Instead, she set it down gently and stood from the table, pacing the kitchen as countless thoughts tangled at once. She wasn't invited for Noah, she knew that instinctively. She was invited because Helen still cared, because the old woman had always seen things others ignored. She didn't want to go. She didn't want to be pulled into Noah's world again. But later that evening, after she bathed the girls and brushed their hair, they climbed onto her lap with sleepy smiles, touching her cheeks with soft hands, their blue eyes glowing like pieces of the past she never fully escaped. And she realized something. She wasn't the same woman Noah destroyed. She wasn't scared anymore. She had built a life with love and patience, not power and control. She had nothing to be ashamed of. If she showed up, she wouldn't be returning in humiliation, she would be returning as someone stronger, someone whole, someone who survived him. 2 weeks later, wearing a simple dress with her daughter's small hands tucked in hers, Evelyn walked up the stone path to the venue where Noah was about to wed another woman. She had no idea that her presence would unravel everything. Evelyn told herself she was prepared, but the moment she stepped onto the grounds of the Blackwell estate, the place where Noah's wedding was about to unfold, her breath caught in her throat. The estate was enormous, almost painfully beautiful, with white tents fluttering in the warm breeze and rows of flowers arranged with military precision. Champagne flutes glimmered on linen-covered tables, and well-dressed guests wandered the pathways, laughing and greeting one another with ease. It was a world she no longer belonged to, a world she had once been invited into only because Noah had loved her, or at least she thought he had until the day he tore her heart in two. Sophia and Lillian clung to her hands, their tiny fingers warm and comforting. They looked adorable in their matching pastel dresses, their dark curls bouncing as they walked, their bright blue eyes scanning everything with fascination. People stopped to stare at them, admiring their beauty, unaware of the storm that was quietly brewing beneath the surface. Evelyn kept her head lifted, her posture steady, refusing to let nerves show. She drew strength from the two little lives beside her. She had come for them, to show herself, not to hide. Whispers quickly spread among the guests as she stepped closer to the tent. Many people recognized her from 2 years ago, some were stunned, some curious, some concerned. But she didn't slow down. She took a deep breath and entered the main area, trying to blend into the crowd without drawing attention. Yet attention found her anyway. Eyes followed her, lingered on the twins, and flicked back to her with thinly veiled questions. She held her daughters tighter. She didn't expect to see Helen Blackwell approaching almost immediately. Noah's grandmother moved faster than she had ever seen her move, her face lighting up when she spotted Evelyn. "My dear girl," Helen whispered as she reached her, her voice trembling with emotion. "You came." She leaned in and hugged her gently, then knelt down to smile at the twins. "And you brought these beautiful angels." "Oh, my heart." Evelyn swallowed hard, overwhelmed by the older woman's sincerity. "I wasn't sure if I should." Helen straightened slowly and squeezed her hand. "Sometimes the truth needs witnesses." The word sent a shiver down Evelyn's spine. Before she could respond, Helen's gaze shifted past her, and her eyes widened slightly. Evelyn turned, and froze. Noah was standing several yards away, staring at her as if she had materialized out of thin air. His breath visibly hitched, his jaw tightening, his expression collapsing into astonishment, then confusion, then something far more fragile. He didn't move. He didn't blink. He just stared. Evelyn felt the weight of his gaze sweep over her, then land on the girls, and that was the moment the world tipped. She saw the exact second he understood. His face paled, his body swayed, and his eyes locked onto the twins' identical blue ones, his eyes. The connection hit him with an almost physical force. She watched shock ripple through him, watched disbelief morph into a dawning horror, followed by raw, aching recognition. Noah took a few slow steps toward them, as if afraid they might vanish if he moved too fast. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. "Evelyn." She stood still, her heart pounding, her daughters gripping her hands more tightly. Sophia hid behind her leg. Lillian simply stared at Noah, fascinated by the tall man who seemed unable to tear his gaze away from her. "Are they?" Noah's lips trembled, the words caught somewhere between his chest and his throat. "Are they mine?" Evelyn felt her lungs deflate as she whispered, "Yes." The truth hit him like a tidal wave. His face twisted, shock, regret, awe, grief, all crashing at once. He dragged a trembling hand through his hair, his breathing unsteady. "My God, 2 years. Evelyn, why didn't you?" She cut him off with a quiet, steady tone. "Because the last thing you told me was that I was the past. And I wasn't going to let my daughters feel like they were part of someone's past too." The words sliced him open. His shoulders slumped, and for a moment he looked like a man stripped of every piece of armor he'd spent his life building. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, Rachel appeared at his side, her heels clicking sharply against the stones. She looked flawless in her bridal robe, her hair curled, her makeup perfect, but the moment she saw Evelyn and the twins, confusion flashed in her eyes, followed quickly by suspicion. "Noah," she demanded, her tone tight. "What's going on?" Noah didn't answer. He couldn't look away from the girls. He knelt slowly, his hands shaking, lowering himself to their eye level. "Hi," he whispered, as if speaking too loudly might frighten them. I'm Noah." Sophia stepped closer, curious, studying him with the same seriousness Evelyn had when she was little. Lillian tilted her head, her blue eyes shining. One of them, Evelyn couldn't even tell which, reached out and lightly touched his sleeve. Noah's breath trembled as if he might break apart right there in front of everyone. Rachel's voice grew sharper. "Noah, what is this?" He stood, slowly, painfully, turning toward his fiancée. His expression was carved with devastation. "They're mine, Rachel." Gasps rippled through the guests. Evelyn felt her stomach twist. Rachel's eyes widened, then narrowed. "Yours? You have children?" "Twins," he whispered, unable to look anywhere except at them. "My daughters." Rachel stumbled back as if struck. Her lips parted with shock, then curled in disgust. "With her?" Evelyn flinched but stayed silent. Noah didn't flinch. He simply nodded, a raw honesty cracking his voice. "With her." Rachel's voice trembled with fury. "And you didn't think to tell me?" "I didn't know," Noah said quietly. "I didn't know they existed. I didn't know Evelyn was pregnant." His voice grew strained. "I didn't know because of what I said to her. Because I drove her away." He looked at Evelyn then, and guilt poured from him so heavily she felt it like a physical force. Rachel inhaled sharply, then exhaled a bitter laugh. "Do you love her?" Noah's silence was the only answer she needed. She ripped the engagement ring from her finger, pressed it hard into Noah's chest, and stepped back. "Then marry your past." And with that, she turned and stormed away, leaving the gasping crowd and the unraveling wedding behind. Evelyn stood very still, trying to ignore the hundreds of stunned eyes watching her. She looked at Noah, who seemed shattered and breathless, caught between devastation and awe. "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice breaking as he looked at the girls again. "I'm so sorry." But Evelyn wasn't ready to forgive. Not today. Not this easily. All she could do was pull her daughters close as their father, finally, painfully, stood before them for the very first time. Chaos rippled through the wedding grounds long after Rachel left, but Noah didn't seem aware of anything except the woman and 2 children standing before him. The guests whispered and scattered, planners scrambled to salvage what little dignity the event had left, photographers hesitated unsure whether to flee or continue, but Noah remained frozen in place, staring at the twins as if they were a miracle he had no right to witness. Evelyn felt a storm of emotions swirling inside her, anger, panic, guilt, and something dangerously close to heartbreak, but she forced herself to stay steady for her daughter's sake. They didn't understand what had happened. All they knew was that a stranger with their eyes was looking at them like they had lit up the entire world. Sophia tugged on Evelyn's dress, confused. "Mama, who is he?" she whispered, her big blue eyes blinking up at her. Evelyn swallowed, her throat tight. She wasn't ready to answer. She wasn't ready for this moment to exist at all. But she could feel Noah's gaze burning into her, silently pleading for permission to speak. She gave the slightest nod, a small act of mercy she wasn't sure she had the strength for. Noah knelt again, slower this time, as though bowing before something sacred. His voice came out rough, trembling despite his effort to steady it. "My name is Noah," he said softly. I think I'm your dad." The girls exchanged wide-eyed looks. Lillian touched Sophia's hand, her small gesture both protective and curious. Noah let out a shaky breath, as if overwhelmed by the weight of the moment. He had spent years believing he had everything, only to learn in a single instant that the most important pieces of his life had grown up without him. Evelyn watched carefully, her arms crossed tightly, ready to intervene if he overwhelmed them or stepped out of line. She could see the devastation etched across his face, but she couldn't ignore the fury simmering in her chest. She had struggled through 2 years of fear, exhaustion, and love so fierce it broke her open, while he lived in luxury making plans with another woman. He hadn't cared enough to check on her. He hadn't cared enough to question. He hadn't cared. Until now. The girls stared at him, fascinated by the stranger who looked like them, but they didn't fully understand. Noah seemed to sense their confusion, so he didn't push further. Instead, he slowly extended his hand to them, not a request, not a command, but a quiet offering. To Evelyn's shock, Sophia stepped forward first, her tiny fingers curling around his. Noah froze as if afraid to breathe. Tears gathered in his eyes, not the restrained kind, but the raw, unstoppable kind that came from a place deeper than words. He covered his mouth with his free hand, trying to contain the emotion that threatened to break him apart. "They're so beautiful," he whispered, his voice cracking. "They look just like..." He stopped, because the end of that sentence hurt too much to say out loud. "They look just like me." Evelyn's chest tightened. The moment was tender, painful, and impossible to ignore. She felt something shift, subtle but undeniable. Before she could speak, Helen appeared again, her expression fierce and unyielding as she shooed lingering guests away from the scene. "Everyone out," she snapped. "Give them space." She guided Evelyn and the girls toward a quieter corner of the garden, and Noah followed, but not until she gestured sharply for him to move. When they reached a shaded area away from the chaos, Helen gently touched Evelyn's arm. "I think you all need a moment," she said softly. "And I hope you won't shut him out too quickly." Evelyn bit her lip. "I don't know what to do, Helen." "You don't have to decide anything today," Helen said. "Just let the truth breathe." She kissed both girls on the heads and walked away, giving them privacy. Now there were just 4 of them. Evelyn felt exposed under Noah's gaze, but she stood her ground. He straightened, wiping his face quickly as if embarrassed to show emotion, though he failed miserably at hiding it. "I didn't know," he said again, his voice hoarse. If you had known, what?" Evelyn cut in sharply. "Would you have called me? Would you have tried to fix things? Would you have left your perfect fiancé? Would you have chosen me then, after everything?" Noah's face crumpled. "Evelyn, I was a coward. I won't pretend otherwise. I was so afraid of disappointing everyone, my family, the board, the press, that I convinced myself I didn't love you. I pushed you away because I didn't know how to choose you. And I've regretted it every day since." She scoffed softly. "You didn't regret it enough to come find me." He visibly flinched, the truth hitting him like a blow. "You're right. I should have done 1,000 things differently. But if I had known you were pregnant..." He shook his head, voice breaking again. "I would have never let you go alone. Never." Silence stretched between them, heavy and trembling. He looked at the girls again, awe softening his features. "What are their names?" "Sophia and Lillian," Evelyn said quietly. He repeated the names under his breath, almost reverently. "Sophia. Lillian." The girls stepped closer to Evelyn, leaning against her legs, watching him carefully. Noah knelt once more, looking at them with the kind of tenderness Evelyn had never seen from him. "I don't expect you to trust me today," he whispered. "Either of you. But I want to know you. I want to be, if you'll let me." His voice cracked, and he swallowed hard. "I want to be your father." Lillian tilted her head, studying him with the innocent curiosity only a child possessed. "Can you play with us?" she asked softly. The question broke whatever strength Noah had left. He nodded quickly, tears spilling despite his attempt to hold them back. "Yes. Anything. Anything you want." And just like that, the first fragile thread formed between them. Sophia and Lillian ran toward a nearby patch of grass, shouting for him to follow. Noah looked at Evelyn once more, seeking permission, seeking forgiveness, seeking something she wasn't ready to name. She hesitated, her heart battling itself, then exhaled slowly. "Go." The relief that flooded his face was almost painful to witness. He jogged after the girls, stumbling slightly as they pulled him into their little world with complete abandon. Evelyn watched them, the man she once loved more than anything, chasing the daughters he had never known existed. The scene was surreal, beautiful, terrifying. Something inside her shifted again, stronger this time. The past wasn't done with them. And neither, it seemed, was the future. Evelyn had expected the wedding disaster to mark the peak of chaos, but in the days that followed, her life unraveled in ways she could never have prepared for. What happened at the estate spread through the city faster than wildfire. Headlines exploded, speculating about Noah Blackwell's mysterious twins and the woman who destroyed his perfect engagement. Paparazzi camped outside his penthouse and attempted to follow his car. Rumors spiraled into absurd stories about secret affairs and illegitimate children. Evelyn saw the articles, felt the panic rising in her chest, and locked her doors so tightly that even sunlight felt unwelcome. She wanted to stay invisible. She wanted to protect her daughters from the noise of a world they were never meant to be part of. But the one person who refused to disappear was Noah. He arrived in Savannah 3 days after the failed wedding, standing on her porch as if he had rehearsed the moment over and over again. Evelyn nearly didn't answer the door, fear twisting in her stomach, but Sophia and Lillian were already running toward it, giggling as if expecting a surprise. When she opened the door, Noah looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, no tie, no polished arrogance. Just a man stripped down to his truth. "I needed to see you," he said quietly, not stepping inside until she moved aside. He knelt immediately, arms opening as the girls barreled straight into him with shrieks of excitement. They climbed into his lap as if they'd known him all their lives, their tiny hands cupping his cheeks while he whispered their names like sacred prayers. Evelyn watched, feeling her throat tighten unexpectedly. She had never imagined Noah, cold, disciplined, emotionally guarded Noah, melting so completely under the touch of 2 toddlers. He stayed that entire afternoon, sitting on the floor while the girls braided his hair with plastic clips and covered him in stickers that said things like "superstar" and "best friend." He let them paint his nails with sparkly purple polish, moving only when they giggled because he was being too serious. Evelyn watched from the kitchen, her emotions a tangled mess of disbelief, sadness, and something dangerously close to affection. She tried to tell herself not to soften. Not to forget how he had hurt her. Not to let him under her skin again. But it was impossible to ignore the way he looked at the girls, as if they were the first real thing to ever exist in his life. Later, when the twins napped in their shared room, the house grew quiet, leaving the 2 of them alone at the kitchen table. Evelyn folded her hands tightly on the surface, bracing herself. Noah sat across from her, rubbing the back of his neck, an old nervous habit she remembered too well. "I ended the wedding officially," he said first, voice low. "Rachel is gone. My family is furious. The board is panicking. Everyone wants explanations. He looked down at the table. But the only thing I can think about is how much time I've lost with them. With you. Her jaw tightened. Don't make this about us, Noah. He flinched slightly. I won't. I promise. Silence stretched between them, heavy and uncertain. Evelyn stared at the wood grain in the table, avoiding his gaze. She wasn't ready for what he was asking for. She wasn't ready to forgive him. Noah, she said quietly, I didn't keep them from you to be cruel. I did it because I was terrified. I was alone. And the last thing you said to me made me believe you never wanted us. I couldn't let my daughters feel unwanted before they even had a chance to be loved. His hands curled into fists. I did that. I caused that fear. I broke something in you I had no right to touch. His voice cracked. I'm so sorry. I know words aren't enough. I know apologies can't erase what I said. But I'm willing to spend the rest of my life trying to undo it, if you'll let me. She looked up, finally meeting his gaze. What she saw in his eyes startled her, raw guilt, determination, a kind of sincerity she had never seen from him before. You can't just walk into their lives and fix everything overnight. No, he agreed softly. But I can show up. Every day. Whatever way you allow. And he did. Over the next weeks, Noah returned to Savannah again and again. Sometimes he stayed for only a few hours between flights. Sometimes he stayed overnight in a hotel nearby. Sometimes he showed up with gifts for the girls, though Evelyn quickly set boundaries on that. She didn't want him buying affection. He listened. He adapted. He began building trust with Sophia and Lillian through presence, not extravagance. He learned their favorite bedtime stories. He learned how Lillian got scared of thunderstorms and how Sophia hated sleeping with the door closed. He learned they both loved strawberry yogurt but refused to eat it unless it came with mommy's spoon. He learned the way they said his name, hesitant at first, then excited, then possessive. One evening, after he tucked them in, he walked out of their room with a smile so soft it made Evelyn's breath catch. They stood in the dim hallway, only inches apart. Thank you for letting me be here, he murmured. You don't know what this means to me. She crossed her arms, trying to shield herself from the warmth in his voice. I'm doing it for them, Noah. Not for you. He nodded, accepting it with no argument. I know. But it doesn't change what it means. She opened her mouth to speak, but a sudden crash from outside startled them both. Rain had begun to pour, hard and brutal, slapping against the windows with a ferocity Savannah storms were known for. Evelyn went to check the back door, making sure everything was locked. Noah followed, pulling out his phone. There's a flood watch, he said after checking the alert. I'll leave once it slows. But it never slowed. It worsened. Soon, thunder rumbled so loudly the house shook. Sophia woke crying, then Lillian did. Evelyn rushed to hold them, but Noah was already there, his arms instinctively wrapping around both girls as they buried their faces in his shoulders. He whispered to them, rocking gently, promising they were safe, promising he wouldn't let anything happen. Evelyn watched them, her heart aching. Something shifted again that night, something she couldn't deny anymore. Noah wasn't the same man who broke her. He wasn't the same man who pushed her away. This Noah was softer, humbler, and so desperately trying to prove himself that it tore at the edges of her resolve. He stayed the night on the living room floor, the twins curled against him like he had been theirs forever. Evelyn woke in the early hours and watched them from the doorway. The storm had passed, leaving the house quiet and warm. And for the first time in 2 years, she let herself imagine a future, not the past they once shared, but something new, fragile, complicated, and terrifyingly hopeful. She wasn't ready to forgive him yet. But she was no longer certain she wanted to live a life without him in it. The weeks that followed blended into something so gentle and unfamiliar that Evelyn often found herself questioning whether the peace she felt was real. She had spent so long building walls around her heart that the idea of lowering even a single brick terrified her. But every time she saw Noah with the girls, every time she witnessed the quiet tenderness he poured into their lives, a piece of those walls softened. He was careful, painfully careful, as if one wrong move might send her running again. He never pushed for conversations about their past. He never forced closeness. He simply showed up, day after day, at whatever hour her life allowed, until the presence of him in her home no longer felt like an intrusion but a natural extension of their new reality. Sophia and Lillian grew attached to him quickly, as children do when love arrives without condition. They ran to the door whenever he knocked, their laughter echoing down the hallway as they hurled themselves into his arms. They told him stories in breathless rambles, drew mismatched portraits of their new family, and insisted he sit beside them during every meal. He learned how to braid their hair, how to negotiate with them when they didn't want to nap, how to distract them with silly impressions when tantrums threatened. Evelyn watched him navigate each new challenge with clumsy devotion, and it rattled her more than any of his apologies ever could. One late afternoon, they all went to the lake near her house, an outing she suggested only because the girls begged relentlessly for a picnic. The air was warm, the sky clear, and sunlight shimmered across the water like scattered diamonds. The girls chased fireflies in the tall grass while Evelyn spread out a blanket. Noah arrived 10 minutes later carrying a basket overflowing with food he clearly didn't cook himself but pretended to. Evelyn arched a brow at the suspiciously perfect pastries. He laughed, embarrassed, and admitted they came from a bakery near his penthouse. It surprised her, how easy it felt to tease him again, how natural it was to slip into conversations that flowed without forced politeness or guarded tones. They talked about the girls, about Savannah, about the small details of everyday life. For the first time in years, she wasn't talking to the CEO who had broken her heart, she was talking to the man she once knew, the man she loved before ambition and pressure crushed him into someone she didn't recognize. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, the girls curled up on the blanket, exhausted by excitement. Evelyn tucked a sweater over them while Noah watched quietly, his expression softening in a way that made her pulse quicken. When she sat back down beside him, their shoulders brushing, she felt a familiar flutter of fear and longing. He spoke first, his voice barely louder than the breeze. "I don't know how to do this perfectly," he admitted. "I don't know how to fix the damage I caused or how to make you believe I won't hurt you again. But I do know that everything I want in this world is right here." His eyes flicked to the girls, then back to her. "And I would give up everything I have to keep it." Evelyn looked at him, studying him carefully. The Noah she remembered had always hidden behind confidence and sharp edges. This Noah wasn't hiding at all. His truth was exposed, raw and trembling in the open. She took a breath, steadying her heartbeat. "I don't want promises," she said softly. "Not ones built on guilt or fear. I want what's real. And I'm scared, Noah. I'm scared of letting you close again. I'm scared of losing what I finally built." He nodded, accepting each word like a vow he intended to honor. "Then we'll go slowly," he whispered. "As slowly as you need. No pressure. No demands. Just time. You and me and them. One day at a time." For a long moment they sat in silence, watching the sky shift into shades of pink and gold. Evelyn felt her hand resting near his, close enough that the slightest movement would connect them. She hesitated, caught between caution and longing, then let her fingers brush lightly against his. He didn't react with desperation or triumph, he simply intertwined their fingers gently, reverently, as though he was holding something fragile and priceless. The girls stirred beside them, murmuring in their sleep. Lillian rolled closer to Sophia, and Noah smiled with a tenderness Evelyn couldn't look away from. He squeezed her hand once, soft, grateful, wordless. She squeezed back. Later, when the sun had disappeared and the fireflies flickered across the field, they packed up in comfortable silence. Noah carried both girls in his arms despite Evelyn insisting it was too much. He only shook his head and kissed each twin on the forehead, whispering something that made Evelyn's chest ache. When they reached the porch, she unlocked the door and turned to him, illuminated by the warm light spilling from inside. He stood on the top step, the girls still asleep on his shoulders, and looked at her as if she were the beginning of a life he'd never allowed himself to imagine. Evelyn stepped closer, heart pounding. "Thank you for today," she murmured. "And for everything you've done these past weeks." He swallowed, clearly moved. "Thank you for letting me try." The words hung in the quiet night air. She leaned in, not for a kiss, not for something final, but for something honest. She rested her forehead lightly against his, feeling his breath catch. "One day at a time," she whispered. His voice trembled as he replied. "One day at a time." It wasn't a promise of forever. It wasn't a return to the past. It wasn't forgiveness wrapped in a ribbon. It was something new, delicate and unspoken, a beginning shaped not by perfection but by growth, courage, and love earned the hard way. And as she watched Noah carry their daughters inside, gently laying them in bed as though he had been doing it their whole lives, Evelyn finally allowed herself to believe that the future she once feared might just become the life she had always deserved.